It's 18 minutes past 4 o'clock. We keep hearing that the UK is in debt to the tune of £2 trillion and counting because of the virus, the cost of the pandemic. But who do we owe this vast amount of money to? And do we have to pay it back? A Bank of England deputy governor has spoken out against setting negative interest rates, which would bring the cost of borrowing rates below zero. The bank has so far responded to the pandemic by cutting rates to just 0.1%, but some policymakers want the bank to do a little bit more. I'm not sure how much more they can do. If interest rates are negative, the Bank of England charges for any deposits it holds on behalf of the banks. That presumably encourages banks to lend the money to business rather than deposit it. Jonathan Davis is economist and wealth advisor from Hertfordshire. Jonathan, very good afternoon to you.
Hello, Roberto.
Jonathan, good to be back on the programme. This idea of cancelling debt, there are a small group of people suggesting, well, we've got this debt, who do we owe it to? Why don't we just cancel it, wipe it out? On paper, it sounds like a great idea. Is it feasible?
There's lots of people globally saying that every nation that holds debt should cancel the debt. It's entirely infeasible. You know the oil crowd, OPEC, they get together and they pretend to set the oil price. They have an agreement, but the problem is a few weeks later, one or other of them reneges on the agreement. Eventually, it all falls apart. There is no way on earth that cancelling debt globally is ever going to happen.
Not at all.
It's not going to happen. It's infeasible. It's impractical. It involves people. It involves politicians. It's not going to happen.
Jonathan, who do we owe? I mean, the world is in debt to somebody. Who? I mean, who do we owe this money to?
Well, I think your listeners will be interested to just focus on the number. First of all, you said very quickly 2 trillion. 2,000 billion pounds. It's an literally astronomical amount of money. So who does the UK government owe that money to? Well, it borrows from pension funds. It borrows from hedge funds, the city, banks, other countries. They call them sovereign wealth funds, and indeed private investors. Your listeners might have heard the term a gilt. In other words, when you're lending money to the UK government, what you're in fact doing is buying a gilt. So lots of different people and organisations lend money to the government.
Okay. Any chance of renegotiating to all these people we owe these £2,000 billion to?
Well, renegotiating. Why would they want to do that? Because they have loaned the government in good faith for an annual interest, and then after the period of the debt, whether it's 5 years or 10 or 20 years, the debt gets repaid. Of course, what happens in practice is that our illustrious government, year after year, decade after decade, borrows a lot more, A, to pay off the old debts, and B, to borrow more, to spend more, because they've made more promises. So, no, there's no reason at all why your pension, my pension, should say to the borrower, the government, you know how we lent you £1 million? It's all right, just give us £500,000 back. Why would they do that? Of course, they're not going to do it.
I hope you're going to put this in your electronic diary, because Marion says, Rob, for once I agree with Jonathan. I think she's had to let her lie down, Jonathan.
Well, she needs a cup of tea, I think.
Don't we all? So listen, so we can't get rid of this debt. We can't just write a letter to these people and say, look, we owe £2,000 billion. We can't afford it. We'll give you a few hundred million instead.
Roberto, I didn't say you can't do it. I'm sure if the government unilaterally says, we owe you, Mr. Pension Fund or Mr. Hedge Fund, £10 million, we're not going to pay it, that's what's called default. And that's what you find South American countries do a lot. And then you become an economic and financial pariah in the global system. It's not the sort of thing that Western governments will do, but what we will do, and indeed the Bank of England and the government want it to happen sooner than later, they want higher and higher inflation, and that, in effect, reduces the real cost of repaying the debt, because you repay the debt with future money, which is worth less than today's money.
But inflation, Jonathan, sorry to cut across, but inflation means higher costs of living for people, for most people who are already under the cosh.
Yeah, absolutely. The chickens are coming home to roost. Decades of politicians over-promising, saying, we will do all these services, we will pay the public sector so much more and all blah, 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 blah. We won't raise your taxes, but what they have done is they've borrowed and borrowed and borrowed, and goodness knows how much they borrowed this year in particular, hundreds of billions of pounds. And as the inflation comes, which they want, in order to get them out of the fix that they've got themselves into, we are the ones who are going to be paying for it.
And we have to pay. What about the idea of negative interest rates? How does that play into this equation?
There are quite a lot of countries actually in the world who have negative rates right across the Eurozone, the European Central Bank area. So that's about 15 or 18 countries. They've got negative rates. Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, they have negative rates. What does it mean? It means that over, say, a 10-year period, you borrow from the pension fund, and the rate is, for example, minus 0.5%. So the lender is actually paying you 0.5% per annum for the privilege of lending to you.
Fantastic.
Why would they do that? They would do it because, for whatever reason, they can't find any other suitable investment. So they're prepared to pay 0.5% per annum. Is it likely to happen here? It wouldn't surprise me that it would happen here in the next year or two. I'm not saying it should, but it wouldn't surprise me. But it's not going to help you or me or your listeners, because actually you'd tend to expect that that's a further move towards inflation.
So what do I take out of this, Jonathan? Should we drink, dance and be merry and let our grandkids worry about it?
We definitely should not do that. We need to stop thinking of someone needs to help me, someone needs to bail me out, someone needs to fund me. We need to take control. We need to stop looking to the state with a capital S, the government, the local authority, whatever. And we need to look after ourselves. And, I'm a wealth advisor. I will say to your listeners, over the next couple of years, you need to be investing in your pensions, in your stocks and shares ISAs for inflation. In other words, in things like oil and gold and things like that. In other words, what we call commodities.
I mentioned this earlier, Jonathan. It's the first time I've seen it in one of those big American warehouses they have from the US that are over here. In one of them, they're selling gold bars. I don't know why I picked up on this, but you walk past the sort of the watch. There are gold bars priced at £25,000 plus VAT. I'm thinking, who on earth buys solid gold bars?
Well, anyone who's got the wherewithal and who has a lot of intelligence, because gold is a phenomenal source of preserving capital and indeed growing it in the environment that we have right now and we're likely to have for years to come.
Jonathan, thank you as always. Jonathan Davis, who's from Hertfordshire, of course. He's economist and wealth advisor. I don't know